Hi, let me check in with the first two essays of On the Cusp of Contact, Gender, Space, and Race in the Colonization of British Columbia, a collection of essays by Jean Barman. And it's the kind of book where you need to take it kind of an essay at a time, or as I and Sean the Book Maniac are, we're taking it two essays at a time. So I'd like to check in with the first two. And boy, I really get to start off with a bang here because the first essay is very much addressing exactly where I'm living. I live on on the traditional territories of the Legunguin. I'm going to butcher all names. Territories of the native peoples in my area. Also Victoria. And the first essay, Race, Greed, and Something More, first published in 2010, deals with two negotiations that happened where native peoples were pushed off of the reserves that had been set aside for them legally. There was a actual treaty for the Legunguin, who were at the time were known as the Songhees, and also kind of more of an informal one with the Squamish people in Vancouver. Now the ones in Victoria, this was on one side of the bay was was the city of Victoria, the legislature buildings. We'll come back to that later. You know where the Empress is now, I think, is the big famous thing. And on the other side was the space set aside for native peoples who had gathered there. Songhees is apparently a way of saying kind of a gathering place. Had gathered there to kind of take advantage of the trade that was going on. And the Legunguin were you would have a winter. You would have a winter and summer places where they would stay. So they set up shop there. This was land that was officially given to them. Not given to them in exchange for them surrendering certain rights to the other land of the Vancouver Island that they happened to have. Kind of that was theirs. They were given they in exchange for that they got this. But and in Vancouver, much the same thing happened. They kind of took up place where sort of False Creek, Kitsilano, under the Broad Bridge, where there's that area is where they were given. But um, on the cusp of contact is very much this transition period where you go from there being not many settlers to the settlers really flooding in. For Victoria, it was because of the gold rush and the onrush of tons and tons of people coming into the area and through Victoria up into the interior, and that for gold rush. For Vancouver, it was the railway and the railway lines, and just that, and Vancouver really exploded in this period. At which point there was all this suddenly. The places where the native peoples were, the indigenous people were, suddenly became extremely valuable. And at this point, attitudes towards native peoples really took a turn, really changed. Um, and I think if there's something that you can really I can take from both of these essays, it's how racism, while it's one of these things that is unfortunately you find in a lot of different cultures and a lot of different contexts, you really see that in this context, the racial theory was um, was something that it was a tool. It was something that was used to help the greed for economic reasons of we have this particular peoples on this particular very valuable land getting more and more valuable as it's so pressed up against our cities. We want this as well. How can we justify taking it? And that's how you get classifications of Native people as children, as being degraded, as being, horribly inferior, as, prone to crime or prostitution or alcoholism. It's like you start suddenly seeing that, like, that racism, oh, it's irrational. It's like, no, actually, this is actually a very rational, very cynical, very hypocritical thing used to as a tool against these people to get them off the land, because we want the land. It's one of these things of, like, if it wasn't monetarily worth it these people, you wonder how, that we need to, there's more and more settlers coming in, we want to shove all the native peoples off. What would it, where would there be as virulent as racism? And I think about this time of Canada's founding and all the colonialist activities going on by Western countries at this time, and you think, this is why racial theory also seems to come really high up, because we need a intellectual justification, intellectual and legal justification to shove these people away, to put them on reserves, to then take those reserves away for their not. So that was a really, really interesting thing about these two essays, of this and the second essay, Erasing Indigenous Indigeneity in Vancouver, which is far more focusing on the Squamish in Vancouver, in that area, and in Stanley Park, and pushing everyone pushing all these people off the land, is striking here. I've listened to kind of a check-in by Sean, and Sean was like wondering, it's like, there's the whole thing of, like, well, people would start talking about, like, oh, well, they've been paid for their land and stuff like this. This is not Sean saying this, but, they'd heard such things. And, what's the comeback to that? I think one of the comebacks to that, at least, I think you have to go specific, because all of these circumstances are particular, have their own particular spin to it, is, at least in Canada, in 1911, Wilfrid Laurier, the then Prime Minister, they make an amendment to the Indian Act, which gives the legal basis for what was going to take place. Indian reservations which adjoin or are situated wholly or partially within an incorporated town or city having a population of not less than 8,000, unquote, could be legally removed without their consent if it was, quote, in the interest of the public and of the Indians of the bands for whose use the reserve is held. So this was the legal justification was being set up of, like, if you don't negotiate with us, we're just going to take it. We are just going to take it. We've made our robbery legal by amending the Indian Act, which also determines who is a, quote, Indian, unquote, cutting only paternal, not maternal, so that cuts out a good hunk of your population already. But also, it's like, you either negotiate with us or we'll just take it. And so that both the Algonquin and the Squamish were negotiating down the barrel of this legal gun that was going to get used against them. And it really reminds me of, like, whenever you see some kind of, like, pristine parkland or some area that's, like, really untouched, it's like you just see the developers year after year after year just kind of hammering away. And this is what happened to the native peoples, is like this had been going on for generations. There had been a generational shift where of the things where they finally found people that would willing to negotiate. I mean, a part of that is also that the legally that the Canadians, the settlers, were engineering stuff so that, like, if you don't negotiate, you're not going to get anything. And indeed, the bullying tactics of the Attorney General, the British Columbian Attorney General at the time, W.J. Bowser, basically was threatening stuff like that. Like if you don't take this offer, you're not going to get a cent. That we're just going to go in there and just evict you forcibly. That all this was taking place, and especially in the case of the Squamish, the province jumped the gun, and even though they had no actual legal right to be doing negotiations or making or forcing a surrender of these lands, they did without the federal government, which completely led to completely enmeshed in kind of legal nonsense. Barman at the very end quotes, it's Homi Bapa. I'm probably butchering that. A post-colonialist theorist, which if you want to have fun listening to kind of frustrated grad students having to read his book, but on Goodreads that's a whole thing. But just she quoting him as saying, we're framing, the whole technique here is kind of summed up in this little sentence of, you're framing the colonized as degenerate on the basis of their race and origin in order to justify conquest and establish systems of administration and instruction. And that is indeed just that sums up these two things of framing it in a certain way. It's like, constant complaints of the Victoria City Council of like, oh, we're looking across at the Legungwans reservation, and it's tumble down, smoke covered wood shacks. And I sort of let that kind of drift over my head, like, oh yeah, maybe it didn't look that great, and it's not the nice, neat little Victoriana kind of buildings of Victoria, but it's like, doing a little bit of research, it's like that is like native architecture that is thousands of years old, of plank houses, which were modular, expanded structures of they'd put down posts and lintels, and they just lay out these red cedar planks, and it was one of these things that was super practical for these people. It had worked for generations of this kind of really mobile. You could expand things. You inherited these houses, not the site. The site didn't matter. You could pull up because it's so modular, because it's so practical. But it's like, yeah, that's me being ignorant, and I can totally envision that being, greedy, ignorant Victorians of the day looking across, wanting that land, saying, "Oh, it's all tumbled down shacks." It's like these are degenerate people who we shouldn't have to have this eyesore in front of us in the thing, versus recognizing a different culture, different actual people. And I mean, it's really telling in the case of the Legungwans that a person no less, probably no less likely to be actually to be a kind of to be sympathetic to them as the oh, do I have it here? I'm sure somewhere I think I wrote it down. Damn it. Okay. As the yeah, okay. There, I found it. This is stuff I want to look for before I try and do this with Sean. Is like how when like the deputy superintendent of Indian Affairs, the federal guy, actually came out like 1906 and kind of looked at the area, met with Legungwan. He said like, well, these people are doing really well. They're like integrated into the community. There's like, they have, very kind of educated leaders because they're mixed descent, so are able to actually gain access to kind of Catholic college education. It's like, well, we should actually just give them the franchise and, subdivide up the land and give them home ownership. At which point the Victoria Council completely freaks out. And it's just like, no, these are horrible, terrible people. We can't, we want the land is really the main thing underneath all this. Is like, we want to make millions off of this, and we're going to do that by getting rid of these people and casting them as others and degenerates that shouldn't be anywhere near our city, which is, I mean, that is the whole thing of the reserve system, is shoving the indigenous people as far away from Canadian society as possible. It's like it's we're yeah, yeah. It's really sucks. Really sucks. Okay, this has been a real ramble. I'm not releasing this publicly. This is just going to be on my private reader channel, but at least I got to practice a little bit before I talked to Sean about it. But yeah, interesting two essays. Oh, okay. And the last thing that I should talk about is that whole thing of the second essay called Erasing Indigenous and Indigeneity. Indigenous Indigeneity in Vancouver is the thing that, like, they go through all the stuff of trying to get these people off the land. Indeed, they take it to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court dismisses testimony by the Native issue, saying Native Indians have no idea of time, and therefore their testimony should not be credited. So it's just like, again, infantilizing these people, and just, you can have the greatest legal system in the world, but if it's racist, isn't gonna be any less corrupt. But the fact that, the second after they actually won a kind of their argument against this and got these people off the land, what did they do? The Vancouver's Park Board then erected totem poles. Totem poles of the people of the area? No, we've tried to get rid of them. These are totem poles of I think it's the Quacudal up in like North Vancouver Island, way up there, safely away from Vancouver, where we like our native people to be, away from us, and to give the great representation of Vancouver, Stanley Park, with all these totem poles, saying like, oh, this is the wonderful, like, native heritage of our thing. And they've quickly kind of started making their hierarchies of these natives over here. They're actually really good, almost as good as white people, natives, that kind of reasoning, but erasing the memory of the actual indigenous people that they have just, like, we're talking almost instantly have just tried to have erased from the area. Stanley Park, where they destroyed, like, giant middens, which would be like invaluable kind of records of kind of archaeological records of the thousands and thousands of years or more of indigenous presence in what became Stanley Park, destroyed, dug up, used to make the parkways, though it didn't actually work, and they had to kind of cover that over too. So it's like, that, unfortunately, that idea, I think it's the end thing of while because those totem poles were going to be part of a kind of an ideal Indian village, recreation of an ideal Indian village in Stanley Park after getting rid of the actual native people. Yeah, for residents and visitors alike, they provide an encounter with indigeneity safely removed from real life. It's like, yeah, that's unfortunately, for too long of a settler, me included, my encounter with a native life is like, yeah, it's indigeneity separated from what's actually happening. So, okay, I'm going to leave it there and then try and record a much shorter message on Voxer for Sean. More videos later.